Namaste, Adab, Sat Sri Akal, hello. This is your Parikrama host Darshan Kaur, back again after a brief hiatus to bring you yet another podcast of relevance to the South Asian community. The topic of today's podcast is to do with domestic violence in the community. And with me in the Parikrama studio are two guests who are here to shed some light on this topic. First off, we have Aparna Bhattacharya, the Executive Director of Raksha. She has been with Raksha for 27 years in different roles and as Executive Director since 1998. She's also on the board of Asian Pacific Institute on Gender-Based Violence and advisory board of South Asian SOAR, Survivors Organizations and Allies Rising. Ronnie Tejani, who is my second guest, has worked at Raksha from 2000 to 2004 as a case manager and as volunteer coordinator. She has since then worked in several areas of domestic violence, mental health, healthcare, and teaching college level students. Welcome to Parikrama Studio, ladies. And I honestly, wanted to start by saying that this topic of domestic violence is very, very close to my heart. As you both know, I have volunteered at Raksha before. I've done fundraisers. I've tried, help in whatever way I can. And I've also been wanting to talk about it on a podcast for a really long time. So we'll talk a little little bit about the circumstances that actually led us to doing this podcast today. But I am, at least glad that you could make it today so that we could talk about this very important topic. So I'm going to start with you, Aparna. Although pretty much everybody knows you and they know about Raksha as well, but we've recently seen an influx, rather, I would say a deluge of South Asians coming into the Atlanta area over the last few years. So I think it might be useful if you actually talked about Raksha and the wonderful, awesome work that the organization does to support the community, and especially when it comes to domestic violence, which is our topic today.
Thank you, Darshan. For folks who don't know, Raksha is a local nonprofit that's been around since 1995. We actually started out as a voicemail system and all volunteers that would check a voicemail. And that was before we had like WhatsApp and Facebook and everything. It became from what was a volunteer run organization to a full service agency, which is a dream come true for many of us who were volunteers way back in the beginning. But basically, Raksha works to promote a stronger and healthier South Asian community through confidential support services, education, and advocacy. At the end of the day, we are working towards healing, empowerment, and justice for South Asian survivors of violence. And when we started, it was kind of like an open book. We were just going to be a resource to the community, but predominantly some of the issues that came forward were issues around domestic violence and divorce. And that was a strong piece of the work that came our way and that we had to do a lot of work around. Raksha has now 27 years. We have actually, at the time, we were all volunteers, and now we have therapists on staff. We have folks who do advocacy. We have folks that do community outreach and engagement and volunteer coordination. So we've grown and we have about 9 individuals on our staff, and we have become a voice statewide, not just for the South Asian community, but ensuring that all marginalized communities have the equal access to support and services as it relates to being a victim of a crime, especially domestic violence or sexual assault.
So, Aparna, I have a follow-up question for you. You mentioned, this organization has been around for 27 years, and you've yourself been associated with this organization for that period. So, in terms of domestic violence, specifically, have you seen the incidence trend like up or down over the years that you've been associated? And I know there has been an increase in population, right?
Right.
But just in terms of overall trend, like, have you seen it go up or go down over the last almost 3 decades?
I think it's hard to gauge because I feel like domestic violence has been prevalent in our community. And when we first started, our community was so much smaller, and we are a lot larger now. So I mean, of course, the numbers have increased. I remember like the first few years, we might have 30 domestic violence cases in a given year. And now, we're having closer to 300 domestic violence cases in a year. And it gets more complex. And, we have unique situations. Our laws have changed. So there's so many different factors that can make the situations more difficult. But our community has definitely grown. And so have the calls. But then we also know that there's a lot of people that still don't even call us. So we're just still getting a percentage of the folks because there's so much fear in calling, hesitation, worry about stigma. If people do call, people may not trust law enforcement. It could impact immigration status. So I think we're still only getting a small percentage of folks who feel comfortable coming forward and calling about, domestic or sexual violence.
And I remember the statistics for when I used to work at Raksha, they used to be so much further apart. But now, if you look at it, it's 1 in 4 women and 1 in 9 men face intimate partner violence, right? So if you think about it, that's about 20 people per minute experiencing intimate partner violence. That's not, looking at just the South Asian community, that's looking at a community at large. So that number used to be a lot more wider. I believe it used to be 1 in 15 and then 1 in 10, and that margin is getting smaller and smaller. So I agree that, I think with having access and more voices out there of organizations saying we're here, it helps people come out more and say, we have this prevalent problem, we do need help. But I agree with Aparna. I think as part of the South Asian community, there's still so many stigmas we just have not been able to break. And so unfortunately, we're still here, still, hoping that these numbers actually grow. So we know that we're actually helping more than we are, although 300 sounds like a big number. Sadly, there are more, and we'd love for that case number to be more as far as services for Raksha as well.
No, that's true. Yes. I mean, it's like, although increasing number means there is increasing violence, but then it also could mean that more people are getting helped.
Yeah.
So I see your point there. So Ronnie, actually, a follow-up question to what you just said, and Aparna mentioned that as well. So there, as we said, a lot of stigma associated with, even people coming out, and talking about it, and it's more like, well, you just got to deal with it, you can make it public, it's my reputation, all of those things are there, right? There is like stigma associated with divorce, like still, right? So, my question to you is that what do you think that we, as as media or even as a community volunteer or influencers that we have within the community, what do you think we could do? How could we help to educate people about this issue?
One is obviously, like you said, the more that you have rallying on your side to, be a voice is more helpful. Unfortunately, I know in the news there's been recent events where we've heard of a domestic violence case that has made national news, and it's been, I feel like, on every outlet that I have seen or even read, I have seen this particular case. And, so many people are like, "Oh my God, I can't believe this still exists." But unfortunately, it's existed. It's going to exist unless we, make it sort of kind of like what a pandemic is, right? When you have a pandemic or when you have a problem that's pretty prevalent, you need the whole community to rally and help and be that voice for that person. So one of the things that I was telling Aparna actually is in a few of the news articles that I've read regarding this, huge case, there hasn't been any resources listed for women, right? So if I am a person that is dealing with a problem like domestic violence, and I'm hearing something that resonates with me, I'm unfortunately not seeing those resources where something can help me, right? Where I can be like, oh my God, like there's a place I can go to get help. I wish that everybody knew about this. So I feel like as one of the things we as a community, as a volunteer, can do is to be that voice for anybody experiencing intimate partner violence, and being that resource and saying there are services out there, and educating more people as we can, because that's, if you don't educate, you're not going to be able to make others understand that this is a problem.
Oh, true. And I, for one, can promise, and we've done this in the past as well. Aparna is smiling there because we did a podcast on LGBTQ plus, just I think a few months ago. It was the first
Yep.
podcast of this year, and then we listed like a whole lot of resources that Aparna was kind enough to share. And wherever the podcast was posted, the resources were listed right below it, so people could
Yes.
have access to that. So if you want to share, I mean, of course, we'll share the link for Raksha and the hotline, number or whatever it is that you want to share. But if any other resources that you would like to share, please do, because we'll.
Absolutely. And even, Raksha being a part of SOAR, I think if we can, have that link available too, because again, it's a national problem and there's organizations that nationally help. So that would be amazing to have something like that out there. And the one thing I love about that website is there's a red link on the top right that says exit now. And it, allows that website to be clicked off immediately so that it helps with safety for anybody that goes on that website.
Yeah, I think it's important to talk about how technology has made it more dangerous for survivors to get help. We love technology, we love all the wonderful things that it does, but it also means that individuals can be surveilled in a different way. Like, they might have cameras in their home, or being able to track you by your phone and being able to see
Track
which
cookies.
yeah,
Track
tracking,
cookies on a website.
right, or be able to see what websites you've been in
Mhm.
to or who you
Browser
called.
history, yeah,
Yes.
browser
So
history.
these are all the things that we have to be careful of, like making the community know that like there's ways that could also increase someone's danger if they're checking out some of these sources. So sometimes, going to an organization may not be easy, and that's where as a community we also have to be informed and know how to support someone, or at least know how to be a bridge to help someone reach out for help.
Right. And, I was talking to our producer Kailash earlier, and as at Atlanta Dunya, we do get such requests, and then we always pass them on to Raksha as well. So Aparna knows I've even sent her cases through Messenger sometimes,
Yes,
right?
yes.
So
Yeah.
so that's it. I mean, whatever we can do to help. So basically, that's the thing. So you mentioned this case that was in the news, and it was very sad. And Aparna, if you want to talk a little bit more about it, this is essentially when I saw the post about that, and I saw Raksha's response to that horrible, horrible incident. That's what triggered this podcast in my mind. That I wanted to have a conversation. I said this is like Ronnie, you mentioned that when we read the news of that kind, that's when a lot of people think, oh really, we thought this had all gone away, right? But it hasn't. It's pretty much there. It's maybe happening every minute, every second of the day as we speak, right? And so this is what triggered this podcast, in that sense that this is a topic that we need to keep talking about, we need to keep reinforcing, we need to keep educating about. Aparna, if you would like to, I mean, I'll leave it to your discretion, if you'd like to mention the incident that we're talking about,
Right.
so that our audience who may not have heard about it can at least know what we've been talking about. That.
So this is essentially a murder suicide where Sonia Khan, who was an influencer on TikTok and was speaking out about getting a divorce and how the community responds, her ex-husband traveled from Alpharetta, Georgia to Chicago. He shot her, and then I think his family was doing a welfare check on him because they couldn't get in touch with him. And when the police were at the door, he shot himself. So it was a murder suicide with Georgia ties, Chattanooga ties, and Chicago ties. And there were so many people that knew Sonia Khan, that like a local mosque did a session last Sunday to, open up a dialogue around this so folks could talk about what it was like when they were getting a divorce, or what are the barriers in the community. And like you said, Darshan, a lot of people may not know the resources and aren't aware of the organizations doing this work because our community has grown so much. But I think murder suicide is happening quite often in our communities. It's not something we like talking about, but it is one of the dangers of domestic violence. So it's not just a family problem. It has very dangerous implications. And so it's something we need to talk about and create conversations around, so folks don't feel embarrassed or scared to talk about dealing with violence that they're experiencing in their homes.
So that, brings me to actually the next question I was going to ask you. It's about the community. So what is the, and not just specific to this particular incident, but what is the response of this community, the Indian community, the South Asian community? Is this, and I'm going to say this, is this one of those things or another one of those things where the community has like an ostrich attitude, as we call it, or the three monkey attitude of like, see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil, right? Is this what is, and over the years, like what has been the response and the support of the community?
Well, I can definitely say that the response has changed over the years. I know when Raksha first started, we had a lot of doors closed. I mean, people did not want us doing workshops. Their perception was, oh, you're here to break up families, and you young girls and your little project. And I mean, you even had faith institutions that didn't really want us. If we were going to speak, they would like say, no, we don't want Raksha there. I mean, there was only one community, and actually it was the Ismaili community that actually let us go in and do workshops when we were first starting. So I think we've definitely come a long way where we're getting a lot more support from community than we used to, and people are willing to talk about it. So I definitely think we've come a long way. But I still think it's something that when you talk to people, we don't want to believe it happens in our own personal community, right? So if I'm talking to someone Bengali, since I'm Bengali, they'll be like, not in the Bangla community, it must be this community, or it's a different faith. We always want to other this whole topic of domestic violence, but not in educated families.
Yeah.
It's always uneducated or somebody of a different religion, faith, or from a different state in South Asia or from a different state in India. We always other it because it makes us feel safe. Because if we have to sit there and say, oh my gosh, my family member can do this harm. Oh my gosh, my next door neighbor, who I am best friends with, is dealing with domestic violence, but they come from such a good family. It doesn't matter. It can impact every single one of us. It doesn't matter how well off you are, what your faith is, what community or culture you're from, how much education you have. We've had doctors who are survivors and doctors who are abusers, right? But we think it makes us safe, and the reality is it doesn't, and it impacts every single one of us. And it's the shame, the stigma, this idea that we have to stay married and what a good married family looks like. That's what actually hurts us, right? We buy into this belief that this is what we need to be, and we're such good educated people, but we are impacted by violence. We are impacted by domestic violence. We're impacted by sexual assault. We're impacted by child sexual abuse, child abuse. All that happens in our community. We're like every other community. I like to say it's not our culture necessarily, but it's a culture of violence that plays out differently in all of our communities.
And I think it also, to a certain effect, affects the culture in the sense of the way that I think most of us have been brought up. There are some of us that are sandwich generations, some of us that are older generations. And I think maybe the notion is changing a little bit in the newer generation, but that generation of, the only way that your life is complete is when you're married. The only way that your life is complete is when you have a partner. The only way your life is complete is you have children. So there's such a deep rooted security, and that's when your life is complete. I think when it comes to being a part of the South Asian culture, at least even in my family, that's something that was huge, right? When are you going to settle down? When are you going to get married? When are you going to have children? And then when you are faced with the fact that, okay, I did all those things, and the person that I married is not who I thought was supposed to be. They're not my partner. They're not the one protecting me. In fact, they're the one hurting me. It becomes so much harder because, that notion of, oh, well, it's a family problem. You need to learn how to fix it within your family. Well, it's hard to fix a domestic violence problem, within the family if nobody wants to talk about it. And of course, there's resources and there's help and there's things that, classes, and there's plenty to do, but it has to be first that there is a problem that exists in order to even address it.
And Darshan, you're going to say this better because, I speak horrible Hindi, right? Because I'm such an ABCD being born and brought up here. But it's what will people say? Like we worry constantly.
लोग क्या कहेंगे?
लोग क्या
Right.
कहेंगे?
Right.
Yep.
So I'm afraid I'll mispronounce it, but it's what will people say is constantly in our head. So we worry, we don't talk about it. We worry about if we get a divorce, what will people say? And even for someone that was born and raised here, the messages that I heard were still very similar. Oh, don't go out in the sun, you'll get too dark and no one's going to marry you. So there's the colorism, right? Or don't go and burn yourself near the stove because then you won't find a good husband, right? And you know, even second generation people who know better, people who even do this work, right? This is so ingrained of like what it is to be married and how divorce impacts us. And even when we know it's violence or when we know it's an unhealthy relationship, we're still scared to take that step because of how much our culture has ingrained this. You know, like the weddings, the big weddings, and all that emphasis we put in our Bollywood movies. Like, and the fact that that's the one industry, like in our community, that we spend crazy amounts of money for is those weddings, right? That may only last a year, but we've spent $100,000 plus on that wedding. Nothing wrong with it, but it's this emphasis we have on marriage, right? And how it's the end all be all.
So this is one, I don't know if you've heard this one before, but I belong to a very conservative Punjabi family, and it definitely domestic violence happens in our community. You know, anyone denying that is gonna have to incur my wrath. You know, so you know, but the thing is that so when I was growing up, and most of my cousins, you know, everyone, they were getting married at 16, 17. You know, that used to be the normal thing. My dad wanted us to study, like all his kids, and you know, I was good at study, so he was like, study as much as you want, never stop me. And my own, like my uncles and other people, the older people in the family, or even, you know, same generation as my dad, would tell him, don't make her study, you know, don't get her educated so much, she will never get married. And unfortunately, or fortunately for me, I never got married, so I kind of proved their point. But but their point was, if I get, you know, independent, then it's not going to be easy to marry me off, right? And so you know, this thing exists, like, you know, don't make your girls too independent, you know, they will never be happy in a marriage, or they will get divorced, or they will not be able to settle down, right? So this is also there.
But
yeah,
I kind of also want to challenge that, because we want women to be independent, because something could, I mean, with COVID, we've learned that anything can happen to any one of our spouses at any point, right? And so that independence is also important for survival, so folks don't take advantage of them, so that they can support themselves. A number of women have been widowed, you know, in the past couple of years, and I know it's been going on for a while, but it's also, we also have to be independent for our own well-being to keep ourselves safe, but also what happens when we lose that partner, even if they're beloved and wonderful and kind, we have to be able to take, you know, care of ourselves.
Absolutely.
No, so things have changed. Like, obviously now, even in my family, you know, the girls are getting educated, but I'm talking about my time. I'm Asian, believe it or not. So that's there. So anyway, you brought up an important point, and I wanted to ask a question about that. So when it comes to domestic violence of, you know, men or women, right? Is this more common in Indian Americans who were born, raised, and married here, or even one or both rather of the partners are from India or South Asia?
It goes, like I said, it goes across the board. There's no exception whether if you grew up in a violent household and you learned, and you don't always have to grow up in a violent household for this to continue, but if that is what you learned and you were here in the United States, it could happen here. And we have folks back home who didn't learn violence in their families, right? And so they may be less violent. So it could be either or. Like, you know, we've had the parents, I remember when Raksha first started, and one of the cases we had was where, you know, the woman was here, the parents were in India, and they were like, well, she's married off, she's no longer our responsibility, right? And then you had the parents from India who are calling Raksha, help my daughter, you know, she can come home, it doesn't matter. So I think with anything, there's no formula. like it just depends on the family, the situation, what the individuals in that family learned, and what the culture of that family is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see it, I think even generationally, see it in the younger generation as well. You see, women trying to leave marriages because of domestic violence from a partner who has been raised here, who went to school here. And, it's just unfortunate that it's still prevalent and it's not a, one size fits all. It's a problem that is it's a problem that exists for all. It's unfortunately it encompasses everything. And I think despite even thinking that it's more prevalent in the South Asian community, it's prevalent in so many communities, and we're just sometimes I feel a little bit unaware about the fact that it happens in so many different cultures, and so many different communities, not just, it's probably, South Asians. Unfortunately, it's not. It's big in a lot of communities.
In the same week that Sonia Khan died, there was a Hmong woman who was killed. There was a Somali woman that was killed. And there were, hundreds of other women who were killed in their own communities. So it is something we have to deal with in our own culture, because what are the ideas and concepts that play into it? But it's something we have to work in all of our cultures.
Mm-hmm.
That's true. So we're coming up at time. I'm getting the signal that we need to wrap this up. But so I was just curious because in India, and I did want to bring this up because a lot of people push back on this whole thing of, domestic violence, especially against women, because of this reason. Because in India, there have been some cases of the misuse of the laws supporting women, right? And it honestly happened in my own extended family, where women will use the laws to basically either demand money or ask for certain things, or they'll threaten with, I'm going to throw you in jail because it's I think the law is 7 years, like you can put the in-laws or the husband's family in jail for without really there needing to be evidence to support, right? So have you seen any cases like that here? And then also, the question will kind of clear the misunderstanding that most people have, is that Raksha supports only women, but you support both women and men and whoever else, right? So
Right.
Tell me if you've heard of any cases like that over here. Have there been any misuse?
I don't know if there's any that are high publicity, but we've heard stories about individuals misusing the system, or there may not really be abused, but they're using it to have the upper hand. We've definitely had situations where men are being abused, and we've supported some men who are being abused. And then when we talk about domestic violence, it's really about power and control. Who has the power, and how are they using it to control the individual? Are they controlling it through physical violence? Are they controlling it through economic situations, or are they controlling it through sex, through isolation? So there's many ways in which power and control is used, and so you have to look at who has the power, right? So you can have a guy who's dependent on his wife, and then maybe she is threatening and making demands. It's possible, and there's definitely situations where I think it's just unhealthy relationships where both of them are calling us and you're just like, okay, I'm not sure what's going on here, and I'm not sure who is, if they're both manipulating the system. So to say that there are people who sometimes misuse the system, that's true with anything, right? And there are folks who are truly abused. And I'd rather make the mistake of, trying to help everybody, but, we can attest and check everything out. But yes, and we've helped folks who are in same-sex relationships, and we try not to discriminate on the basis of, who's being abused. We just try to examine, like, who's got the power, who's got the control, what's the situation.
And I want to point out, sometimes there is that challenge in helping people, because with domestic violence, it is a cycle. It goes through, phases of, there is a period of honeymoon, there is a period of intimidation, then there's a part, piece where then the violence, no matter what it is, or the abuse occurs, and it kind of goes around. So sometimes you will catch that victim in that honeymoon phase where everything's great, and none of these periods have like time limits. It's not like, oh, the honeymoon phase lasts a month or it lasts a year. You just don't know what happens with whoever that power or control is happening with. So unfortunately, sometimes I think that becomes also a challenge when you're trying to help someone. And if they're in that phase of, oh, but everything is fine now, you have to realize, yes, but it's cyclical. It does come back around. And if this has happened once, it can happen again.
And in some situations, it might be something that happens on a weekly basis. And for another situation, it might be once every 17 years because the violence was so extreme that, that's the constant threat to keep someone in control. Like, remember what happened at this time?
Mm-hmm. And that's still abuse, right? That's still using that particular situation as abuse. And so it becomes difficult sometimes, I think, because in our mind, we are convinced that, oh, this isn't going to happen again, or the same thing may not occur again.
Right. No, I mean, I would almost say, like, because abuse occurs in so many ways. It's not just that somebody has to physically hit you.
Right.
It's about putting you down, at every step, just not being appreciative sometimes, right? Or basically, like, I mean, I don't want to go into all the details of how many.
But being taken for granted, and I think the emotional abuse is much harder to pinpoint and heal from. Like when you see a bruise or you see a broken arm, that's really easy to pinpoint that something's wrong, right? Yeah. But the emotional, like Darshan, or I'm going to give Ronnie as the example. Ronnie, if I may ask your consent to use you as an example. And I ask consent just because, I don't want her to think I can, but if I tell Ronnie every day, and I don't even have to yell, but like, you think you're smart? You think you're going to do well? Are you sure? I mean, I'm suddenly talking down to her and I'm doing it every day and I'm not even yelling. But that's one way I can bring her down and continue to have her doubt herself. Are you sure anyone else is going to want to be with you? I'm sorry, Ronnie, I don't get that, but I just like to give the example of how subtle abuse can be, right?
But Aparna, you're right, because I actually had a friend who used to say that to me when I was like way younger. Of course, I wouldn't tolerate that kind of nonsense anymore, but she used to say that to me, who would want to be with you? Right. And I used to, at that point, I don't know what happened. Like I used to actually believe her, right? But that's also abuse, right? But then when you're in a relationship and that living with that person or dealing with that person day in, day out, and that's what you keep hearing.
Yeah, absolutely. What you faced was a bully, and then there's bullies in a marriage that will do things like that as well. They'll manipulate you and will, second guess who you are and your personality and your talents and everything about you, and the fact that you're not good enough. And those are harder. Psychological and emotional abuse is a little bit, harder for people to remove themselves from, and also even recognize the fact that this is happening, because there is a certain amount of brainwash that goes with it, because then eventually as a person you start believing it when you hear it enough.
That's true. That's very true. And so I think it's up to the support system basically that person has, besides just not only Raksha as an organization, but the family, friends, close friends, whoever, or volunteers or whoever we are, is basically letting the victim know that no, you're good enough, you can do this, you can get out of this, and you start believing in themselves again. I think that rehabilitation, I think, becomes like more
and that's how do we counteract all that negative stuff. Wow, you're beautiful, you're so talented.
Exactly, there you go. Well, thank you. I thought you were referring to me.
I was
all right. So I think I'm honestly, like, this is one of the topics that we could just keep on going on talking about for hours and still wouldn't even scratch the surface, right? But unfortunately, I'm getting a message that we need to really end this now. So any message that you would like to give to the community, and we'll wrap this up.
I know, Darshan, you wanted me to talk a little bit about like H4s and immigration relief. So really for folks to call in, even if you're on an H4 dependent, there might be immigration options available. To call Raksha at 404-876-0670 or email us at raksha@raksha.org. because there might be options, and your immigration status shouldn't keep you from seeking support or leaving a violent situation. And, we don't require that people leave. We're working with many survivors who are still in their marriages, and that we're here just to support you with the choice that you want to make and help you make the best decisions for you.
Thank you, Aparna, because yes, this is one of the things we were talking about before the podcast. And because a majority, a lot of the people, if not a majority of the women or men who, may be victims, are afraid to come forward because they're worried about these things. They're afraid about their visa, their immigration status. And so the information that you're providing will actually help them, that they know that they can still find support, that they can still find a way out of the situation. Ronnie, sorry, go ahead.
No, and just really quickly, I think if you go to the Raksha YouTube page, we just recently did something with the South Asian Bar Association talking about immigration relief for our community. So
yeah, and I was going to say you can find Raksha on several different outlets. We're on there. We're on Instagram. We have our website. You can look up the YouTube video. So there's several ways you can actually access information about Raksha. But mostly, I think the most important part is that fact that it's a resource that's here to support you. Whether you want to leave, you don't want to leave, or you just need the support to hear someone that they're here for you. And whenever you're ready to take that step, right? Nobody's here to kind of tell you that, oh, you need to do this now. It's just, this is the support you have. And please call so that you don't feel like you're alienated.
No, absolutely. And if you could send the links to the YouTube that you were talking about, as well as, link to your Instagram, we have your website link. We will put all that information and any other links that you want to share. We will put that along with the podcast or in the comments wherever we post this podcast. So thank you, both of you. Thank you, ladies, for coming here to our studio today, for talking about this very important topic. And I hope that even if this helps one person, it will be time well spent, even if this helps one person to get out of a tough or bad situation.
Yes.
So thank you, both of you, again. And with that, this is Darshan Kaur, your Parikrama host, signing off for today. I'll be back again soon with yet another hard-hitting topic for the South Asian community. See you next time. Bye-bye.